good evening, or perhaps good night, wherever you are, wherever your head may be resting. I invite you now to gently lay aside the concerns of the day. Breathe in and out, and let your mind settle. Tonight, we're traveling far from the rhythms of our modern world, far from glowing screens, buzzing phones, and the relentless flow of noise. We are going somewhere quieter, much, much quieter. Imagine yourself stepping beyond a thick wooden gate, iron-bound and heavy, into the world of a medieval monastery. The year is perhaps 1142, or maybe 1175. The exact date doesn't matter much. Time here is not measured by minutes or hours, but by bells, always bells. Behind these stone walls, the world moves to a different rhythm. It is slower, certainly, but not restful, not indulgent. This is not a retreat in the way we think of it today. It is a life of prayer, silence, obedience, and relentless routine. Tonight's story is a gentle descent into that world. You may find it fascinating. You may drift off. Both are perfectly welcome. We will begin by simply living a day in the life of a 12th century monk, an ordinary soul in an extraordinary setting. Then we'll listen to the quiet rebellion of Hildegard of Bingen, whose visions and voice stirred even the silence of cloistered walls. From there, we'll tiptoe into the scriptorium, where some monks quietly preserved ancient secrets. And finally, we'll visit a more opulent side of monastic life, where silent halls echoed with quiet wealth and subtle power. But for now, the bell is ringing. Let us begin. The bells that ruled your day. Living like a 12th century monk, you awaken. Not by choice, but by sound. It is dark, very dark. The faint outline of your narrow wooden bed is barely visible. The air is cold and dry. There is no fire, no warmth in your stone cell. A small slit of a window high above you offers only moonlight, if that. Your blanket is coarse. Your robe's habit, they call it, thick and scratchy. Wool, always wool. The bell rings again. Matins, the first prayer of the day. It might be just past midnight. It might be closer to 2 in the morning. Again, the exact time hardly matters. What matters is obedience. You rise silently, just as your brothers do. No one speaks. The rule of Saint Benedict forbids unnecessary words, and at this hour, words would feel intrusive. The cold stone beneath your feet is unforgiving. You shuffle into your sandals. There is no thought of comfort here, only duty. You make your way to the chapel. The corridor is dimly lit by a single flickering candle placed at intervals along the wall. The smell of old wax and limestone surrounds you. It is a familiar scent, constant, like the rhythm of prayer, like the bells. In the chapel, voices rise not in chatter, but in chant. Gregorian, plainchant, smooth, unwavering tones echo in the vast stone space. You join in, your voice merging with dozens of others in the same flattened, solemn cadence. There is something soothing in it, something ancient. Matins gives way to lauds. Then, finally, you are permitted to return to your bed for a little while, but not for long. By dawn, the bell calls again, and so the day begins. A day in hours. The medieval monk's day is divided not by sunlight or meal breaks, but by prayer. 7 times the bell rings. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Some monasteries add extra observances. But this is the basic shape of time here. In between prayers, there is labor, manual labor, spiritual labor. Alike today, you are sent to the garden. It is early spring, and the ground is still hard, crusted with the last memories of winter frost. Your task is simple: turning soil, coaxing life from the earth. There is no conversation, just the sound of the hoe against dirt, the occasional call of a bird overhead. The garden smells faintly of loam, of cool earth and damp straw. You rise from your crouch, brush your robe, and return to the cloister. You wash your hands. The water is cold and metallic in the copper basin. Then to the refectory, the dining hall, a long table, wooden benches. Everyone sits, still, no words. Your meal is served. A ladle of warm, gray gruel, a crust of yesterday's bread. On certain days, a bit of cheese. On feast days, perhaps fish. Never meat. Never indulgence. As you eat, a single monk reads aloud from scripture or the life of a saint. His voice is clear but calm, echoing softly off the vaulted ceilings. It is the only sound besides the clink of wooden spoons, and even that is muted. Your robe smells faintly of oil and old wool. The ink-stained fingertips of the brother beside you tell you he spent his morning in the scriptorium, copying manuscripts letter by letter. His life is marked by rhythm and repetition. In your cell, there's a little wooden cross, a writing tablet, a candle stub, a small straw-stuffed mattress that rests directly on a plank bed. The walls are stone, always stone, cool in summer, unforgiving in winter. When storms roll through, the wind whistles through the narrow slits of windows, and the sound seems to rattle the very bones of the building. And yet, this is not a life of punishment, at least not in the way it might seem to us. For many, it is a life of purpose, of structure, of simplicity. A life where every hour is spoken for, every choice already made. No doubt, it is hard. The sleep is short, the food plain, the schedule rigid, but it is also, in its own way, a life of peace, predictable, ordered, the world outside of warlords. Taxes, illness, and famine rarely intrudes beyond the cloister walls. And within, the presence of divine purpose hovers over every act. It's easy to imagine silence as absence, as emptiness. But here, silence is presence, a spiritual discipline. You learn to listen in silence, not just to the birds or the distant echoes of footsteps, but to your own breath, your own thoughts, your own conscience. In time, the lack of speech becomes less lonely, more meditative. You begin to sense the rhythm, the soft shuffle of robes, the gentle thud of sandals on flagstone, the faint scratching of quill on parchment in the scriptorium, the steady crackle of candle flame, and always the bell. It divides your day. It orders your mind. It becomes, in its own way, a kind of heartbeat. As dusk falls, you gather again for vespers. The stone chapel glows gold in the candlelight. The chant rises one final time before the night deepens. Then Compline, the last prayer of the day. You return to your cell. The walls, unchanged. The bed, narrow. The air, still cold. You lie down in silence, hands folded over your chest, eyes to the wooden beams above. And just before sleep, if sleep comes you, hear it once more. The distant tolling of the bell. The rhythm continues, the same tomorrow and the next day and the next. Now, let us shift gently away from the cold, damp cells of anonymous monks and toward a different kind of cloistered life, one marked not only by silence and ritual, but by visions, music, and the quiet tension between obedience and revelation. You are still in the Middle Ages, still behind stone walls. But now, we are in the Rhineland, near the banks of the Neha River, and it is the 12th century. A woman lives here. Her name is Hildegard of Bingen. You may picture her in her later years, a tall, pale figure in a black habit, framed by a white wimple. Her eyes are deep set. Her hands are folded neatly over a book, perhaps one she wrote herself. She is calm, she is composed, and she sees things no one else does. Hildegard was born in 1098, the 10th child in a noble family, in keeping with the custom of offering one child to the church. Her parents dedicated her to monastic life at the age of 8. By 14, she was enclosed, quite literally, into the anchorage of a monastery attached to Disibodenberg, a small room, a spiritual tomb, some called it. She lived there under the care of Jata, an older, noble woman turned recluse who served as her mentor. It was a life of extreme discipline and little sunlight. The world outside passed by largely unnoticed, but inside her mind, something was happening. From an early age, Hildegard began to experience visions. Not dreams, not fantasies, but vivid, consuming illuminations. She kept them secret at first, only Jata knew, and perhaps the stone walls. Hildegard later described her visions as accompanied by intense light, a brightness she called the living light. It wasn't harsh, she said. It wasn't painful. It simply was. Within this radiance, she received images, symbols, instructions, messages she interpreted as divine. They were not always comforting, and yet she obeyed them, quietly, reverently. Years passed. Jutta died. Hildegard became Magestra, teacher and spiritual guide to the other nuns. Still, she held her visions in private, until she could no longer keep them hidden. When Hildegard was in her early 40s, the visions grew more insistent. She described a voice urging her to write down what she saw. She hesitated. Was it pride? Was it sin to claim divine sight? At last, she confided in her confessor, then in the abbot, and then the bishop. An inquiry was made. Eventually, even Pope Eugenius III read a portion of her writing and approved, and so Hildegard wrote her first major work, Svivius, short for Know the Ways of the Lord. It's a massive theological text filled with strange and beautiful visions, each interpreted with symbolic care. Her images spoke of cosmic harmony, of divine order, of mankind's place between the celestial and the earthly. She dictated every word to her scribe, a monk named Volmer, and her assistant, a nun named Richardess. This, in itself, writing theology, was unusual. Women were not forbidden, but they were rarely encouraged to lead in this way. Hildegard did not ask for permission. She simply stated what had been revealed to her, and when men questioned her authority, she reminded them she was merely the instrument. I am a feather on the breath of God, she said. She wasn't loud, she wasn't aggressive, but she was persistent, quietly defiant in a world that prized silence, especially in women. Eventually, Hildegard made a controversial decision. She and her nuns would leave Disibodenberg. The monks there were not pleased. Disibodenberg was ancient, venerable, respected, but Hildegard saw it as too rigid, too controlling. She wanted a space for her community, a place shaped by her vision, and so, with some political maneuvering and a great deal of resolve, she secured land at Rupertsberg, overlooking the Rhine. She founded her own abbey, her own space. It was still cloistered, still bound by monastic rule, but it was hers. Hildegard was not only a visionary and theologian, she was also a composer, one of the earliest identifiable composers in Western history. In fact, her music was not simple, it was not modest, it soared, long, flowing melodies that reached beyond the rigid plainsong of her male contemporaries. Music meant to mirror the divine harmony she saw in her visions. She wrote hymns to the Virgin Mary, to the Holy Spirit, to angels and saints. You can imagine her standing in the candlelit chapel of Rupertsberg, eyes closed, as her nuns sang in soaring, almost otherworldly tones. The music, fluid, bright, alive, lifted upward, as if reaching for the light she so often described. Though cloistered, Hildegard did not remain hidden. She wrote letters, hundreds of them, to bishops, to emperors, even to the Pope. She offered advice, correction, warnings, always calmly, always with humility, but never silent. She preached against corruption in the church, against the arrogance of kings, against the neglect of the poor. In her final years, she even clashed with church authorities over a burial dispute refusing to exhume a man they deemed unworthy of holy ground. For this, her abbey was placed under interdict. No masses could be said, no sacraments offered. It was a spiritual punishment, but she held firm. Eventually, the ban was lifted, and Hildegard remained undeterred. She died in 1179, aged 81, a remarkable age for the time. Her visions ended. Her music remained. Her writings survived. Her abbey at Rupertsberg was later destroyed, her bones likely scattered, but her voice, her calm, determined voice, continued to echo. In 2012, centuries later, she was canonized as a saint and named a doctor of the church, one of only 4 women to receive the title. So now, may imagine her once more, standing at the edge of her abbey garden. The Rhine flows quietly in the distance. The sky is pale blue. A breeze stirs the folds of her robe. She listens, and somewhere beyond sound, she hears the breath of the divine. Not thunder, not fire, but light. And in that light, harmony, still cloistered, still composed, but never truly silent. Let us turn now from the solitary figure of Hildegard and the quiet certainty of her visions to something far more elusive, something hidden in the shadows of time and tucked away in the folds of parchment. Imagine again the dim interior of a medieval scriptorium. It smells faintly of ink made from oak gall and iron, of scraped parchment, and the soft scent of beeswax from the candles. The only sound is the scratch of a quill across calfskin. The silence is not peaceful, but tense, purposeful. Here, in these cloisters, monks did more than pray. They copied, they preserved, and sometimes they concealed. Welcome to the secret world of monastic libraries, where knowledge slept in silence. The medieval monastery was more than a place of worship. It was, in many ways, a repository of the world's fading memory. When the Roman Empire crumbled in the West, its administrative structures dissolved, but the monasteries remained. As cities emptied and roads crumbled, monks continued to transcribe. In chilly rooms lined with wooden desks, they bent over fragile texts by candlelight, working hour after hour to preserve what might otherwise be lost. They copied the Gospels, of course, and the Psalms, the rule of Saint Benedict, but also ancient philosophy, Greek mathematics, Roman law codes, even poetry. Not all of it was understood. Some of it was copied, simply because it existed, because to destroy it would be to extinguish something irreplaceable. So they inked it onto new parchment, let it rest in the dark. Not every text copied was treasured. Some were whispered about. Some were hidden behind Latin phrases and encoded symbols. Some were simply scraped away. Monks sometimes reused parchment, a process known as creating a palimpsest. The original writing was carefully scraped off to make room for a new text, but the old words never fully disappeared. Centuries later, those ghostly writings have begun to speak again. One of the most famous examples is the Archimedes palimpsest, a 10th century manuscript that to the naked eye contained only a Greek prayer book, but hidden beneath the prayers were earlier writings by the ancient mathematician Archimedes himself. These were not merely math problems. They included radical theories about infinity, the laws of physics, and early inklings of calculus ideas far ahead of their time. How did these writings survive? Because a monk, centuries ago, had used the parchment to write something else, and by doing so, accidentally preserved a glimpse of intellectual brilliance that had vanished from the world. They were actively suppressed. Ancient works on astrology, alchemy, or pagan philosophy were often considered dangerous, heretical. Some were locked away in monastic libraries. Others were annotated with cautionary notes warnings, scrawled in the margins in a different, trembling hand. A copy of Aristotle might be permitted, but only with commentaries that softened his challenge to church doctrine. Plato might be allowed, but only if carefully filtered through the lens of Christian Neoplatonism. Other works on medicine, sexuality, or natural science were sometimes cataloged, but rarely shown, hidden behind wooden doors, bound in plain leather. No decoration, no illumination. The monks who preserved them did so carefully, quietly, sometimes even reluctantly. You might imagine a monk, robed in brown, sitting late at night with a manuscript open before him. He reads Latin fluently, of course, but perhaps this text is in Greek or Syriac or Arabic. Monasteries, especially in places like Spain or southern Italy, had access to texts from the Islamic world, texts that included knowledge from Persia, India, and the ancient Greeks. The transmission of this knowledge was complex, fragile, sometimes welcomed, sometimes resisted. And yet, in those cold stone libraries, ideas float silently through the ink. Algebra, astronomy, anatomy, not always understood, not always trusted, but always written. Not all books were dangerous. Some were beautiful. Monks created illuminated manuscripts, texts adorned with intricate illustrations, golden leaf, and vibrant colors. The Book of Kells, the Lindisfarne Gospels, and the Codex Amiatinus are among the most stunning examples. Each letter a work of art. Each page a tapestry of color and symbol. But even these artistic creations held layers of meaning, hidden references, embedded theology. To the sleepy eye, they are decoration. To the attentive reader, they whisper ancient truths. By copying and preserving ancient texts, some welcomed. Some unwanted monks served as unintentional rebels against the loss of knowledge. They did not always know what they preserved. They did not always agree with its content, but in their quiet labor, they created a bridge between the ancient and the modern world. Imagine that, a 9th century Irish monk, hunched over a Latin copy of a Greek translation of an Egyptian manuscript, never knowing that, centuries later, his work would fuel the Renaissance, and perhaps echo even now in the algorithms of your screen. Most of these books are gone. Fires, wars, mold, time. But some remain, in vaults, in libraries, in private collections, and every so often, a fragment is discovered. A bit of Greek under Latin, a smudged diagram in a prayer book, a name long thought lost reappearing in faded ink. The monks are gone, but their secrets remain hidden, waiting, wrapped in silence. We now arrive at the final turning of our quiet path, from the chill austerity of the early morning bell, to the mystic visions of Hildegard, to the ink-stained shadows of forgotten texts. Now, let us wander into yet another chamber of monastic life, a place no less silent, but profoundly different. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast walled estate. The gardens are neatly trimmed. The cloisters are bright with sunlight. Doves flutter among carved stone arches. And within gleaming wood, silver goblets, soft woolen tapestries. This is not the hard-scrabble world of the penniless monk. This is a wealthy abbey. In the Middle Ages, land was wealth, and monasteries, particularly Benedictine and Cistercian houses, accumulated land through donation, inheritance, and royal favor. Nobles, anxious for their souls' salvation, often gave away acres, mills, vineyards, and villages to the care of the church. And so, monastic orders became landlords. Abbeys like Cluny, Fountains, and Mont Saint-Michel amassed immense holdings. They managed tenant farmers, collected tithes, ministered justice. Some even minted their own coinage within these abbeys. The rhythm of prayer was accompanied by the rhythm of accounting, of contracts, of ledgers and legal claims. It was a life of prayer, yes, but also power. Step inside the cloister walk of one such abbey. The stone is warm from the sun. The air carries a faint scent of rosemary from the herb garden. You hear the rustle of sandals on polished flagstones. Unlike the bare cells of earlier segments, These quarters are modestly elegant. Each monk has a wooden bed, a chest, a window with a view dot. In the refectory, meals are served on long oaken tables. They cook, clean, tend to the livestock and fields. This allows the monks more time for reading, contemplation, and management. The abbots of these grand monasteries often lived lives indistinguishable from noble lords. They wore finely made habits, dined on multiple courses, traveled with retinues, received guests, kings, dukes, bishops. Their libraries were well stocked, their treasuries full, their alliances complex, but still, always silence. Not the silence of poverty, but the silence of distance, of authority, of sacred detachment. One abbot might spend an afternoon negotiating with local barons. Another might be embroiled in a dispute over water rights or mill revenues. A third might sit in a scriptorium, composing theological treatises or penning letters to Rome. These were men of letters and of influence, and yet, at sundown, they still returned to bathe their walls. They still knelt, because, however gilded their walls, they still lived by the rule. The chapels in wealthy abbeys were often splendid. High vaulted ceilings, carved choir stalls, windows of stained glass in deep blues and reds. The light poured in like liquid, casting color over the stone. Gold-embroidered altar cloths, adorned with jewels. These spaces were built not to dazzle the monks, but to glorify God. Still, the monks who walked beneath those colored beams were not untouched by the beauty. Imagine the sound of the choir, dozens of trained voices rising in chant, perfectly timed. No distractions, just tone and breath and harmony. It is the same chant sung in the poorest hermitage, and yet here, in this space of grandeur, it resonates differently, richer, fuller, more complete. Wealthy abbeys did not simply exist. They had to maintain their position carefully. They depended on donors, but could not be too subservient. They owed allegiance to bishops, but sometimes resisted episcopal control. And always, they had to guard their reputation for holiness. A scandal, financial or moral, could ruin them, so they cultivated an image, serene, devout, learned. This image was expressed in manuscripts, in architecture, and even in burial practices. Great abbeys were final resting places for nobles. A duke might be buried near the high altar. A benefactor's name carved into a stone bench, his soul prayed for in the monk's daily cycle. And in return, the abbey remained secure, its towers maintained, its silence uninterrupted. Despite their wealth, monks still took vows of poverty personally, if not institutionally. They owned nothing. They wore the same habit, whether threadbare or newly spun. They rose at night to pray, ate simple meals, and confessed their sins in chapter each morning. Some were aware of the contradiction. Others justified it. This beauty, they said, is not for us, but for the glory of heaven. Still, others quietly worried that luxury softened the discipline. But for centuries, the system held because it worked, because the balance of silence and power, wealth and renunciation, gave the abbey its strange, unshakable peace. Kings grew wary of powerful monasteries. Reformers criticized their privilege. New ideas swept across Europe and England during Henry VIII's reign. The great abbeys were dissolved, stripped, sold out, their stones hauled away, their altars shattered, their libraries dispersed. The silence was broken. Other regions followed, slowly and unevenly. By the 18th and 19th centuries, many monasteries had been emptied, some peacefully, others by force, and yet some abbeys still stand in France. In Germany and Italy, monks still walk the cloisters, still sing, still pray, that their silence endures. You've seen the monastery from many angles: the cold discipline of the ordinary monk, the visionary courage of Hildegard, the hushed mystery of forbidden texts, And now, the structured grace of a well-endowed abbey, all silent, all sacred, all bound by the same rhythm, yet shaped so differently by time, by wealth, by power, so much contained within quiet stone walls. And now, as our journey draws to a close, we return, softly, to the beginning. The bell still rings, not harshly, not urgently, but rhythmically, like a heartbeat in stone. You have walked through a world few today would recognize yet, one that helped shape the quiet corridors of Western memory. A world ruled not by ambition or noise, but by obedience, discipline, and time. You rose before dawn with the monks of the 12th century. You tasted their silence, their routine, their stillness. You witnessed the visions of Hildegard of Bingen, a woman cloistered, yet boundless. You stood among hidden books, their fragile secrets sleeping under scraped parchment, and you wandered the corridors of the great abbeys, where wealth cloaked itself in silence. We are drawn forward, always forward, our minds lit by screens and voices and 1,000 small decisions. But the monastic world moved in circles. Chant repeated each day. Seasons cycled through the liturgical year. The bell rang, not to interrupt, but to return. There was always another prayer, another hour, another silent meal. They were not chasing anything. They were keeping time with eternity. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps with the weight of the day still clinging faintly to your shoulders. No famine, no storm, only stillness. A monk in his cell folds his hands in prayer. A nun finishes her page of illuminated script. Somewhere, a novice trims the herb garden, rosemary and lavender brushing against the hem of his robe. The rhythm of their lives, measured, repetitive, quiet, was not designed for excitement. It was designed for peace, and sometimes, perhaps, peace was found. You are not a monk. You are not bound by their rules or their bells. But tonight, you can borrow their quiet. You can let your mind slow to their pace. Let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts settle like dust in a warm library. The world is still there. For now, for just this moment, you may rest in the silence, in the shadow of stone, in the comfort of repetition. Let the last bell fade into the night, and sleep well.